On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 plunged into the Java Sea. All 189 people aboard died. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed shortly after takeoff, killing 157. Both planes were Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. Investigations revealed a common thread, a flawed automated system called MCAS, and Boeing's deception about it. Families of the victims demanded accountability. The United States Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. Boeing, one of America's largest defense contractors, faced the possibility of prosecution. According to the Department of Justice, Boeing employees misled the Federal Aviation Administration. The charge: conspiracy to defraud the United States. Prosecutors alleged that Boeing withheld critical information about MCAS during the aircraft's certification process. The FAA, relying on Boeing's representations, approved pilot training materials that omitted mention of the system. Airlines bought the planes. Pilots flew them without full knowledge of the software that could override their commands. The alleged fraud, investigators concluded, contributed directly to the regulatory failures that preceded both crashes. In January 2021, Boeing and the Justice Department reached a deal. Boeing agreed to pay $2.5 billion, a $243.6 million criminal fine, $500 million to a victim compensation fund, and $1.77 billion in compensation to airline customers. In exchange, the DOJ would defer prosecution for 3 years. If Boeing complied with the terms, including implementing a compliance program and cooperating fully with regulators, the charge would be dismissed. The agreement was called a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, or DPA. Victims' families objected, calling the deal too lenient, but a federal judge approved it. 3 years passed. Then, on January 5, 2024, an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 lost a door plug mid-flight. Passengers were exposed to the open sky at 16,000 feet. No one died, but investigators found that 4 critical bolts were missing. The National Transportation Safety Board and FAA launched investigations. Boeing's manufacturing practices came under intense scrutiny once again. The incident raised a troubling question: had Boeing truly reformed, as the 2021 agreement required? Or had the company failed to meet its obligations? In May 2024, the Department of Justice informed Boeing that it had breached the Deferred Prosecution Agreement. According to prosecutors, Boeing had failed to implement and maintain an effective compliance and ethics program, a core requirement of the DPA. The breach determination meant the original criminal charge could be revived. Boeing disputed the finding. The company insisted it had met its obligations and cooperated fully with oversight. But the DOJ's position was clear: Boeing had violated the terms, and the protection from prosecution was no longer in effect. With the Deferred Prosecution Agreement voided, Boeing faced the prospect of criminal trial. Instead, the company and the Justice Department returned to the negotiating table. The question was whether Boeing would accept a new plea agreement or force prosecutors to bring the case to court. A trial would be lengthy, expensive, and uncertain for both sides. Boeing risked conviction, the DOJ risked losing. In corporate criminal cases, negotiated resolutions are the norm. According to legal experts, fewer than 5% of federal corporate prosecutions go to trial. Boeing and the government began crafting a new deal. In July 2024, Boeing and the Justice Department announced a new agreement. Boeing would plead guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. The company would pay an additional $243.6 million criminal fine, matching the 2021 penalty. Boeing would also invest $455 million in compliance and safety programs over 3 years, overseen by an independent monitor. In return, the DOJ would not pursue additional charges related to the 737 MAX crashes. The agreement, structured as a plea deal rather than another DPA, required court approval to take effect. Families of the crash victims objected immediately. They argued the plea deal was unjust, negotiated in secret, and failed to hold Boeing truly accountable. Paul Castle, a University of Utah law professor representing some families, filed objections in federal court. The families wanted Boeing prosecuted at trial. They wanted executives held personally responsible. They wanted a voice in the process. Under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, victims have the right to be heard at sentencing and to be treated with fairness and respect. The families argued the DOJ had excluded them from negotiations. In October 2024, U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor held hearings in Fort Worth, Texas. Victims' families testified. Boeing's attorneys argued the plea was appropriate. The DOJ defended its prosecutorial discretion. Judge O'Connor pressed both sides on the terms, the compliance monitor's independence, and whether the agreement served justice. Legal observers noted the judge's skepticism. In December 2024, Judge O'Connor rejected the plea deal. He ruled that the proposed independent monitor lacked true independence because the selection process gave Boeing too much influence. The agreement, he concluded, did not satisfy the court's standards. The Department of Justice appealed. Prosecutors filed a notice of appeal with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Boeing, as the defendant, had the right to appeal as well, and the company joined the government's appeal. The central legal question: did the district judge have the authority to reject a negotiated plea agreement on the grounds he cited? Prosecutors argued that judicial oversight of plea deals is limited. Once the defendant and government agree, and the deal is lawful, courts should defer. Victims' families, now interveners in the appeal, argued the opposite, that judges must ensure justice. In early 2025, the Fifth Circuit heard oral arguments. Government attorneys emphasized prosecutorial discretion and the practical difficulties of corporate criminal trials. Boeing's counsel stressed the company's cooperation and the substantial financial penalties already paid. Attorneys for the victims' families countered that the plea deal circumvented accountability and violated victims' rights. They cited the Crime Victims' Rights Act and argued that the families were entitled to meaningful participation, not mere notification. Appellate judges questioned all sides closely. The legal community watched, aware the decision could shape corporate criminal enforcement for years. On March 14, 2026, the Fifth Circuit issued its decision. The appellate panel reversed Judge O'Connor's rejection of the plea agreement. The court held that the district judge had exceeded his authority by imposing conditions on the independent monitor's selection. According to the Fifth Circuit, once a plea agreement is procedurally proper and the defendant is competent and willing, the trial court's role is limited. The appellate judges did not address whether the deal was just or adequate, only whether the lower court had the power to reject it on the stated grounds. The ruling was narrow but decisive. With the appellate decision in place, the case returned to the district court. Judge O'Connor, bound by the Fifth Circuit's ruling, accepted Boeing's guilty plea. Boeing was formally convicted of conspiracy to defraud the United States. The company paid the additional $243.6 million fine and committed to the $455 million compliance investment. An independent monitor, selected under the revised process, began oversight. The criminal case, which began with investigations in 2019, was effectively concluded. Boeing had avoided trial, but it had not avoided a criminal record. The question remained, was this accountability, or merely a transactional resolution? For the families of the 346 victims, the outcome was devastating. Michael Stumo, whose daughter Samaya Rose died on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, called the resolution a betrayal. Nadia Milran, Samaya's grandmother, said the system had failed. Paul Castle, their attorney, argued that the plea deal allowed Boeing to escape real consequences and that no individual executives were charged. The families had sought criminal trials, personal accountability, and a public reckoning. Instead, they received a negotiated plea and financial payments. The legal system, they said, had prioritized expediency over justice. Boeing, in public statements, acknowledged the guilty plea and expressed condolences to the victims' families. The company stated it had cooperated fully with investigators and had made significant changes to its safety and compliance programs. Boeing emphasized the appointment of new leadership, the implementation of enhanced oversight, and billions of dollars in investments in quality and safety. CEO David Calhoun testified before Congress in 2024, saying Boeing was committed to transparency and accountability. Critics countered that corporate statements are not the same as systemic reform, and that a guilty plea without individual prosecution sends a troubling message. The Department of Justice defended its handling of the case. In court filings and public statements, prosecutors argued that securing a guilty plea from Boeing, a rare outcome for a major corporation, represented meaningful accountability. The DOJ noted the total financial penalties, the compliance monitor, and the company's criminal conviction. Prosecutors also pointed to the practical challenges of proving criminal liability at trial, especially against a corporation with vast legal resources. The government emphasized that the resolution served the public interest by ensuring ongoing oversight and preventing further harm. Critics, including former prosecutors, questioned whether the DOJ had the will to try the case. The Boeing case raises fundamental questions about corporate criminal justice. Can a corporation truly be held accountable without prosecuting individuals? Do financial penalties, even in the hundreds of millions, deter future misconduct at companies that generate tens of billions in revenue? Is a guilty plea a meaningful sanction, or simply a cost of doing business? Legal scholars, victims' advocates, and policymakers continue to debate these issues. The Boeing 737 MAX case is not an isolated example. It reflects broader tensions in how the United States prosecutes corporate crime. And it underscores a persistent challenge, balancing the public interest in accountability with the practical realities of criminal enforcement. Boeing paid nearly $2.8 billion in total penalties related to the 737 MAX crashes in criminal case. The company pleaded guilty to a federal felony. It operates under a court-ordered compliance monitor. Its reputation suffered significant damage, and the 737 MAX grounding cost the company billions more. Yet no Boeing executive faced criminal charges. No one went to prison. The families of 346 victims say justice was not served. Boeing says it has reformed. The legal system says the case is closed. Whether Boeing truly got away depends on what accountability means. The crashes happened. The fraud occurred. The legal battle is over. But the larger question, whether corporate America learned the right lessons, remains open.